Now, I know a lot of people in the wake of COVID were predicting, oh, the commercial market is going to collapse in Alaska. There's not going to be anything left. And that's obviously not the case. Um, but but aside from that, what is the state of the commercial market here in Alaska? And I mean, I understand there's going to be different sections of it, but if you can give kind of a bird's eye view to kind of answer that question.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So when COVID first came along, obviously, office space really suffered. Retail really suffered. Um, we were kind of hanging on to see what was going to happen with retail. Are people going to go back to shopping, going to the restaurants and everything that they used to be doing? Luckily, that did eventually have a recovery. Matsu Valley probably recovered faster than Anchorage because they were able to open up sooner. As far as office space goes, that was one thing where globally we've been really concerned about. But kind of how it's played out is initially we thought, oh my gosh, everyone's going to just transition to working from home. They're never going to come back to the office now that they have all this flexibility. But as it kind of progressed, we found that employees and people in an organization just really thrive with interaction with each other. And they didn't actually like being on Zoom all the time or in their basement working all the time. They actually really collaborated much better if they were in the office at least part of the time. So we saw kind of this hybrid work situation come out to be very common. And so what happened was instead of businesses completely abandoning the space they had leased in an office building, instead maybe they negotiated to shrink their footprint a little bit because maybe they didn't need to have everyone in the office every single day. So that's kind of where the hybrid model of work in the office space has changed. So that being said, it has recovered, and well, not completely recovered, but it's done better than we thought it was going to, especially in Anchorage. It seems like there's a lot more vacancy in Anchorage than maybe in the Matsu Valley. But retail, on the other hand, has just been on fire, and we've had so little inventory, but so much demand. So that's been a very, very tight market. The other thing that's been really tight is industrial, kind of like I mentioned before. So, for example, warehouse space has been really hard to find. One of the reasons for that is we had this massive supply chain problem, right? So we had retailers and contractors and all these people trying to get things shipped up here. And then finally, when it did come, they ended up with this surplus of goods. So they needed a place to put it. So that kind of added to that squeeze in the warehouse sector as well. The other thing is, as we've had more demand in warehouse, because our construction prices are so high right now, we're just not seeing new warehouses. So so a lot of times they don't even hit the market and they're already retraded or released. So it's really, really tough to find warehouse, Matsu Valley or Anchorage. So really only the owner user, it would make sense to build a new industrial building right now. It doesn't pencil out very well for investors. So if you are a tenant looking for a warehouse space, you're in a really tough spot.
That does make quite a bit of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there, you kind of mentioned just a few differences between Anchorage and the Matsu Valley. What are do you have any more differences, distinctions that you have between commercial real estate market in Anchorage versus the Matsu Valley?
Yeah. So one thing that happened during the pandemic, kind of what I mentioned before, is the Matsu Valley was open for business most of the time, whereas Anchorage was more shut down for a longer period of time. That can be devastating for business owners. So some people saw that and said, well, I'm done with Anchorage. I'm moving out to the Valley. There's a lot of demand in the Valley. We'll see if we can make it work there. Or maybe a business from Anchorage wanted to expand. And so they saw that the Valley was open. So they went ahead and opened another space in the Valley. So that's been happening. The other thing on kind of a global or national, really, from that perspective, is that since the pandemic, we've seen so much capital flying around. There's a lot of capital out there, and so when interest rates were super low and people had money, there was kind of this flight to secondary and tertiary markets as far as like investors go. Okay, so Anchorage is a secondary market. Palmer Wasilla in the Matsu Valley, that's a tertiary market. And the reason was because people were able to now choose where they worked. So that's why it was kind of attractive for investors to move out of the big cities, move their capital into where they see more potential growth. So we did actually see some more institutional investors come into Anchorage and pick up properties. So it made it more difficult for local investors to come in. However, once the interest rates went up, that kind of scared off the institutional investors, and now kind of the more local people are able to get their hands on properties a little easier. I do see the Matsu Valley continuing. I mean, I'm probably biased. I am home based in the Valley. So, but I see a lot of potential in the Valley because a lot of people, as you know, Jamin, are moving to the Valley. They're finding that the lifestyle is more what they desire, not for everyone, but for a lot of people. And so as far as like retail, I think that we're going to continue to grow quite a bit. I know we have some really good retail developments in the pipeline. I know that the borough and the cities and those local entities are really motivated to have these projects happen and to work together to have those projects happen to really grow our economy here, because really the Matsu Valley has been a really strong point in Alaska's economy for quite some time, and it looks as if it's going to continue to be that.